Now back to this 538 piece. They're really, really worried here about polling. On average, Survey USA and Western Kentucky University missed the final margin in the Kentucky governor's poll by 13.4 and 11.1 percentage points, respectively. 13 points they were off by. They had Bevin getting 40% of the vote. He was going to lose in a landslide, folks. And he won 53% of the vote. His opponent got 44. It was a landslide win for the Republican, predicted to be a landslide loss the day before the election. As they write here at 538, as if the electorate became about a dozen percentage points more Republican between when the polls were taken and Election Day. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder how something like this happens. They're scratching their heads over there. And then they write, it's not yet clear whether pollsters simply projected that more Democrat voters would show up than actually did, or whether undecided voters broke overwhelmingly for Republicans. The former, meaning more Democrats projected than actually showed up, the former suggests an electorate modeling problem that could be a big problem during the presidential primaries when turnout is low. On the other hand, trouble modeling the electorate would be less of an issue in 2016 when the turnout is high. Speaking of modeling, let me go back to global warming for a second. Computer models, and I know, folks, I'm blue in the face saying this, and those of you who are regular listeners hear this over and over again, but you're never going to forget this. You're never going to have to remember this. It's going to be at the front of your mind. The only evidence that there isn't. The only evidence for global warming is computer models. There is no evidence to suggest that there is climate change caused by man taking place. There is none. It's all computer models, and this is why the predictions are always for the next 30 years, the next 50, the next 100. Not for next year, not in the next month. They never make predictions where anybody today is going to be alive to know whether they were right or wrong. In politics, you can't do that. You can't have political polling models that predict election results 30 years from now. You got to do it for this election. If the computer models for global warming missed all of the new ice in Antarctica and the lack of melting ice at the North Pole, what good are they? We had the story this week that Antarctic ice is expanding rapidly, surprising everybody. Why didn't these vaunted computer models predicting global warming predict increased ice? And since they didn't, what good are they? Well, here we come down to the models that the pollsters are using for turnout. And you know as well as I do that they always project two things, that there are more registered Democrats than Republicans, and that Democrat turnout is going to be much higher. And both of those models failed in Kentucky. And now they are scratching their heads over their polling models. We find that polling is nothing more than the same type of thing used to predict global warming. Models. They put together computer models on what they think the turnout's going to be, and then they go find a polling sample to represent that. They don't just choose 1,500 people as scientifically as they can and go ask them what they're going to do and then project results. They have computer models which tell them, well, the turnout's going to be 10%, 15% more Democrat than Republican. The independents and moderates are going to turn out at X, and the Republican turnout's going to be whatever it is. And they always shoot low on the Republican side and high on the Democrat side. Every poll I've ever seen, every sample. And in some cases, the weight given to Democrats in polls is so out of kilter that it can't possibly be true. And this is age-old belief that there are two times as many Democrats in America as there are Republicans. So they put together their model, and then they go get their sample. And what they're writing about, my God, if our models are wrong, oh no, what are we going to do? They're in trouble. And they'd better be looking at their global warming models, too, because it's the same bunch of people. I mean, it's the same people on the left. Some of them are scientists. Well, they're all Democrats. Some are disguised as scientists, others disguised as journalists, others disguised as think tank specialists, others disguised as pollsters. But they're all Democrats. They're all leftists. I say all, 90%. And they put their models together based on their bias. And don't forget, there's something you cannot take out of this equation. That is, they are loaded for bear because they lost their monopoly 30 years ago. And ever since, the greatest consequence of that has been they have now had to fight for an audience which used to be guaranteed and built in. There was no competition for them. Now there is, and they're dealing with it in a very partisan and angry way. And it's creating this huge partisan divide in this country. I'm convinced all of this is on them. Because we're just harmless, lovable little fuzzballs here, for the first time in 30 years, offering opinions and facts different from what they project. You remember the words of Mitt Romney, oh, it was so much better 25 years ago. Oh, when we all had the same set of facts. And when the Republicans were perennial and happy losers. But I don't want to just talk about Kentucky. Even the Washington Post, from coast to coast, the headline, coast to coast, conservatives score huge victories in off-year elections. And you know, this is another key point, too. This turnout model doesn't hold for presidential race. Presidential race turnout's a whole different thing because that's when all of the bought and paid for Democrat vote shows up, from the unions to the, you just name it. And you have a Democrat on the presidential ballot, and when it's a person and a personality, it's a much different thing than issues being the centerpiece of an election. The off years, these have been issue-oriented elections, and in those elections, the Democrats are just losing in landslides. In personality elections, they're winning. That's another reason I think people on Republican side are turning to Trump. Anyway, just like the midterms 1 year ago, it was another awful night for Democrats. Republican Matt Bevin won a big upset the Kentucky governor's race. The guy Mitch McConnell beat by 25 points in the 2014 primary will now become just the second Republican governor in Kentucky in 40 years. Democrats failed to pick up Virginia State Senate. Bloomberg and the punk Terry McAuliffe overwhelmingly rejected in Virginia. And even the Washington Post writes here that it was a huge blow to Governor McAuliffe, who went all in to make it happen, to get the Democrats in charge of the state Senate. Democrats could have won by capturing just one seat, because of the tie-breaking authority of the Lieutenant Governor, Ralph Northam, but Republicans held every single seat they had. Houston, the Equal Rights Ordinance designed to protect the rights of gay citizens and others. That's not others, it's transgenders. This was pick your bathroom. For all intents and purposes, this was pick your bathroom. Whatever bathroom you want to go in, we in Houston, you can go. It was overwhelmingly rejected. And so the left gets to run around and say, wow, Houston rejects equal rights. That's not at all what was rejected. Madcap, irresponsible liberalism, social, cultural decay is what was rejected in Houston. And it wasn't even close. Ohio rejected the legalization of marijuana by 2-1. And even in San Francisco, the sheriff who defended San Francisco's sanctuary city policy was defeated. Imagine that. Quick time out. Can't wait to get to your phone calls and get started on the audio sound bites of all of this. And then we meld the latest presidential news into it. Keep in mind the polls now. What does it mean here? All of these pre-election polls, practically all of them were wrong, and some of them big. What does that say about polling in the presidential primaries? And Mrs. Clinton is now, in a very mean-spirited way, going after old Bernie Sanders. First, she called him a sexist, and now she's throwing down the race card on Bernie Sanders. It's very fluid out there, folks. It's very unsettled. And with the apparent flaws in polling, everybody, particularly on the left and the drive-by media, is in panic city today because they don't know what to believe, and the days are gone when they had control of what you believed. They no longer have that control, and they don't know what you believe, and that leads to abject panic among them. We'll be back.